Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. I'm your host, and tonight we're heading to Alaska, where the darkness lasts for months and something ancient is waking up. What I'm about to share with you are 9 real accounts that were never meant to be public. A nurse who watched her patient's teeth fall out and grow back as fangs. A police officer who found people frozen alive, still conscious, still aware, trapped in ice forever. And that's just the beginning. These aren't ghost stories your friend told you. These are official reports, real testimonies from people whose lives were destroyed by what they witnessed in Alaska's frozen wilderness. Some of them are still missing, some wish they were. And the creatures they encountered? They're still out there, waiting in the cold and the dark. I won't spoil what's coming, because you need to hear this for yourself. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and I'm warning you right now, don't watch this alone. Because what lurks in America's last frontier is far worse than anything you've imagined. Let's begin with the first account, and trust me, you're not ready for this. My name is Sarah Kenguk, and I've been a registered nurse for 8 years. I got my degree from the University of Alaska Anchorage, then came back home to work at the Shungnak Village Health Clinic. Our clinic serves about 250 people spread across the remote villages along the Kobuk River. It's not easy work. We're the only medical facility for 60 miles in any direction, and during winter storms, we might be completely cut off for weeks at a time. I grew up in Shungnak, hearing my grandmother's stories. She'd tell me about the old times, when hunger could drive people to do terrible things. The Wendigo, she'd whisper during long winter nights, comes when someone eats human flesh to survive. Once you taste it, the hunger never stops growing. I always thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the wilderness. But what happened in March 2023 changed everything. I thought I knew about medicine, about my culture, and about what's really possible in this world. March 15th started like any other day at the clinic. The morning temperature was minus 22 degrees, and fresh snow had fallen overnight. I was checking our medicine supplies when I heard the helicopter blades cutting through the air. Emergency transports were rare this time of year. The weather had to be really bad for someone to risk flying. The paramedics brought in Robert Sheldon, a 34-year-old mechanic from our village. Everyone knew Robert. He fixed snowmobiles and generators, had a wife named Linda and 2 young kids. The rescue team found him in an emergency shelter about 15 miles northeast of town. His hunting partner, Marcus Pete, didn't make it. They'd been caught in a sudden blizzard 5 days earlier. Robert was conscious but hypothermic. His core body temperature was 89 degrees, which should have put him in serious danger. His skin was pale gray, almost translucent, and he kept shivering even under our warming blankets. But what struck me as odd was how alert he seemed. Most hypothermia patients are confused, drowsy. Robert's eyes were sharp, focused, almost predatory. "How are you feeling, Robert?" I asked while checking his vitals. "Hungry," he said immediately. "Really, really hungry. You got any meat? Raw meat?" I thought it was just the hypothermia talking. Patients sometimes crave strange things when their body chemistry is off. I brought him some heated chicken soup from our small kitchen, but he pushed it away like it disgusted him. "No, not cooked. Raw. You got any raw fish? Raw anything?" Dr. Martinez, our visiting physician, examined Robert thoroughly. Everything seemed normal except for that persistent low body temperature. No matter what we did, warming blankets, heated IV fluids, warm room temperature, his core temp stayed locked at 89 degrees. That first night, I was finishing my paperwork when I heard sounds from Robert's room. Scratching sounds, like fingernails on metal. When I checked on him, he was sitting up in bed, dragging his fingernails along the bed rail. His nails had grown noticeably longer during the day, and they looked sharper somehow. "Robert, you need to stop that. You're going to hurt yourself." He looked at me with those sharp eyes. "I can smell you," he said quietly. "You smell warm, really warm." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I made a note in his chart about possible delirium, but deep down, something felt very wrong. Day 2 was when things started getting really strange. Robert's wife Linda came to visit with their kids, 8-year-old Tommy and 5-year-old Sarah. I was standing outside Robert's room when Linda screamed. I rushed in to find Robert backed against the wall, his hands covering his mouth. His teeth had changed overnight. They were loose in his gums, and new, sharper teeth were growing in beneath them. Small points of bone were pushing through his gums, and there was blood on his lips. "What's happening to me?" he whispered through his hands. "Please don't let the kids see me like this." I sent Linda and the children home and called Dr. Martinez immediately. We sedated Robert and took x-rays of his jaw. The images showed something impossible. His adult teeth were being pushed out by new growth underneath. The new teeth were longer, sharper, more like canine fangs than human teeth. That night, I called my grandmother. At 82, she was one of the few people left who remembered the old stories in detail. "Ananu," I said, using the respectful term for grandmother. "Tell me about the Wendigo again." There was a long silence on the phone. "Why are you asking about that, granddaughter?" I told her about Robert, the hypothermia that wouldn't break, the craving for raw meat, the changing teeth. When I finished, she was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "He ate the other one, didn't he?" She finally said. "2 survived the storm." "How did you know that?" "Because that's how it starts. Once you taste human flesh to stay alive, the hunger grows inside you. It changes you from the inside out. The old people called it the Wendigo curse. But Ananu, that's just a story." "No, granddaughter. Some stories are warnings." Day 3, Robert's transformation accelerated. His skin had taken on a gray, almost see-through quality. I could see the dark lines of his veins underneath, like a roadmap of infection spreading through his body. His fingernails had grown into actual claws, thick, yellow, and razor-sharp. But the worst part was his behavior around other patients. Mrs. Sheldon came in for her diabetes check, and Robert became agitated the moment she entered the clinic. He started pacing his room, scratching at the walls, sniffing the air like an animal tracking prey. When pregnant Emma Kanguk came for her prenatal appointment, Robert went into a frenzy. He threw himself against his door, howling and clawing at the wood. I had to physically restrain him while Emma ran out of the building in terror. "I can smell the blood," he panted as I held him down. "I can smell the baby's blood. It smells so warm, so rich." I sedated him again, but I was running out of medications. Our supply helicopter wasn't due for another week, and I was terrified of what might happen if I couldn't keep him calm. That night, I found Robert in our small lab area, which was supposed to be locked. He had broken open our research freezer and was eating raw fish samples with his bare hands. The samples were meant for testing river pollution. They weren't even food-grade safe. "Robert, those fish could be contaminated." He looked up at me, his mouth full of raw fish, blood and scales stuck to his new fangs. "They taste perfect," he said. "Everything raw tastes perfect now." His arms looked longer somehow, hanging past his knees when he stood. His spine was curving forward, giving him a hunched, predatory posture. When he walked, it was more like a prowl. Day 4 brought the most terrifying change yet. Robert's limbs had definitely elongated. His arms now hung almost to his knees, and his fingers had stretched to accommodate the growing claws. His spine curved so severely that he had to look up at me from a permanent crouch. But he could still talk, and that somehow made it worse. "Sarah," he whispered as I checked his restraints. "I can hear them calling to me, the others. They're out there in the forest, and they're waiting for me." "Others? What others, Robert?" "The ones who came before, the ones who survived the same way I did. They're calling me home." I contacted the tribal council, hoping they might have some traditional knowledge about how to help Robert. But when I described his condition, the elder council members went silent. Finally, Joseph Sheldon, Robert's own uncle, spoke up. "We can't help him, Sarah, and we can't let him stay in the village. If what you're describing is true, he's dangerous to everyone here. But he's your nephew. He's not my nephew anymore." That night, a massive blizzard hit Shungnak. The winds were howling at 60 miles per hour, and the temperature dropped to -40. Our generator was struggling, and half the clinic's lights were flickering. I was checking on Robert when I realized his room was empty. The window was open, and there were claw marks in the wooden frame where he'd torn it apart from the inside. A trail of blood led from the window into the swirling snow outside. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and emergency radio and followed the trail. I knew I should have waited for help, but Robert was still my patient. I couldn't just let him die in the storm. The trail led northeast, toward an old trapping cabin about 2 miles from town. The wind was so strong I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but Robert's tracks were easy to follow. They were bigger now, with deep claw marks in the snow. The cabin was dark, except for a faint red glow coming from inside. As I got closer, I could smell something terrible, rotting meat mixed with wood smoke. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water. I pushed open the cabin door and immediately understood why the tribal council had been so afraid. Robert was there, but he wasn't alone. 3 other figures sat around a dying fire, all in various stages of the same transformation Robert was going through. One looked almost completely changed, gaunt, elongated, with gray skin and yellow eyes that reflected my flashlight beam. Another was somewhere in the middle, still recognizably human, but with the same claws and fangs Robert had developed. The third one looked almost normal, except for the hungry way it stared at me. "You followed him," the most transformed one said, and I recognized the voice. It was Marcus Pete, Robert's hunting partner. Who? This was supposed to be dead. "Marcus, but you died in the storm." "I did die in the storm, but not the way you think." Marcus's voice was different now, deeper and raspier. "Robert didn't just find my body, Sarah. He killed me when the food ran out, and I killed the hunter before me. It's how we survive out here." The cabin was full of evidence I wished I hadn't seen. Old bones scattered in the corners, torn clothing from different time periods, a hunting rifle that looked like it was from the 1972. "How long have you been out here?" I whispered. "Decades," said the third one. And now I could see it was an older woman, maybe 60 years old. "We take turns going back to the villages. We find people who get lost, who get desperate. We help them make the choice we made." "Robert is almost ready to join us permanently," Marcus continued. "Your people forgot the old warnings. They forgot what happens when survival costs too much." Robert emerged from the shadows in the Virus, back of the cabin. The transformation was almost complete. His skin was gray and translucent, his limbs unnaturally long, his face gaunt and predatory. But his eyes still held a flicker of the man I'd known. "Sarah," he rasped. "I tried to fight it. But the hunger, it never stops growing. And now they're telling me the village is full of warm blood, full of food." I realized they weren't just planning to survive in the wilderness. They were planning to hunt, to feed, and they wanted Robert to help them. "We've been watching the village for weeks," the woman said, "waiting for our newest member to be ready. Tonight, we hunt together." I tried to back toward the door, but Marcus moved to block my path with impossible speed. They had me surrounded. I remembered my grandmother's stories, the old protections she'd taught me. I started reciting the traditional prayers in Inupiaq, creating a circle of spiritual protection around myself with gestures my grandmother had shown me years ago. The Wendigo couldn't come any closer, but they wouldn't let me leave either. "Your grandmother's magic is strong," Marcus admitted, "but it won't last forever, and we can wait." I watched in horror as Robert completed his transformation. The last traces of humanity disappeared from his eyes, replaced by pure, predatory hunger. He was one of them now, a creature that had once been my patient, my neighbor, someone I'd grown up with. The pack prepared to leave for the village. I knew I had to warn everyone, but I was trapped in my protective circle. If I left it, they would kill me instantly. Finally, I made a desperate choice. I broke the circle and ran for the door, knowing they would chase me but hoping I could reach the village first. The Wendigo gave chase immediately, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the storm. But somehow my grandmother's prayers had given me just enough protection to stay ahead of them. I reached Shungnuk and pounded on, every door, screaming for people to get inside and lock their homes. Most people thought I was crazy, but a few of the elders recognized the terror in my voice and helped spread the warning. That night, the Wendigo circled our village, calling out in the voices of dead relatives. I heard my own grandfather's voice calling to me from outside my house, begging me to come out and help him. But I knew it was a trick. By morning, they had vanished back into the wilderness. I filed an official medical report claiming Robert died of exposure and hypothermia. The rescue team found some torn clothing and blood in the cabin, which supported the story. But I know the truth. The Wendigo pack is still out there, growing stronger each winter. Every year, more hunters go missing on the trails around Shungnuk. Some of them are found eventually as new members of the pack. I quit nursing 6 months later and now work to preserve the old stories. I teach the traditional warnings to anyone who will listen, trying to make sure people remember what my grandmother tried to tell me. Because sometimes survival comes at a cost too high to pay. And some hungers, once awakened, can never be satisfied. If you're ever lost in the wilderness and you find someone willing to share their food, make sure you know what kind of meat it is before you take that first bite. Some meals change you forever. My name is Tommy Nyokpuk, and I've been a park ranger at Denali National Park for 6 years. I'm a Inupiat, born and raised in Alaska, and I learned to track and hunt from my father and grandfather before I ever set foot in a ranger station. I know these mountains like my own heartbeat. I can read animal signs that most people would walk right past, and I've handled everything from lost hikers to angry grizzlies. But what happened in August 2023 showed me that all my training, all my family's traditional knowledge, wasn't enough to prepare me for what's really out there in the wilderness. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 hikers had been found dead near the park boundary, and the scene was wrong. That's the only word for it. I'd seen bear attacks, wolf kills, even moose trampling incidents. This was different. The bodies were torn apart, but not randomly. There was a pattern to it, like the attackers knew exactly what they were doing. I was assigned to investigate with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a wildlife biologist from the University of Alaska. She was studying wolf behavior in the park, trying to understand pack dynamics and territory disputes. Jennifer was smart, thorough, and completely convinced that science could explain everything. She thought we were dealing with a rogue wolf pack defending their territory. The first attack site was 3 miles off the main trail. As we hiked in, Jennifer carried her tablet and digital camera, making notes about vegetation and animal signs. I carried my grandfather's old field glasses and a .308 rifle that had never let me down. The morning was clear and cold, with that sharp smell of early fall in the air. When we reached the site, Jennifer immediately started photographing everything. The victims had been experienced hikers with good gear, but their camp looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The tent was shredded in precise strips, not torn randomly like an animal would do. Their backpacks were emptied methodically, contents scattered in small piles around the bodies. "Look at this," Jennifer said, pointing at claw marks on a tree. "These are definitely wolf claws, but the spacing is off. They're larger than any wolf tracks in our database." I knelt down near the fire ring and found something that made my blood run cold. Human footprints in the soft dirt, clearly defined. But 10 feet away, those same prints changed. The heel marks disappeared, and the toes spread wider. They became wolf tracks, but bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. "Soil displacement," Jennifer said when I showed her. "The victims were running. Their feet slipped in the dirt. It's just natural erosion." But I remembered my grandfather's stories. He used to tell me about the adlet when I was young, usually after I'd been disobedient or wandered too far from camp. Half-human, half-wolf creatures that hunted in packs. They could think like people but kill like animals. I always thought they were, just stories to keep kids close to home. The second attack site was worse. 2 hikers this time, a couple from Oregon. Their gear was arranged in deliberate patterns around the bodies, hiking boots placed in a perfect circle, sleeping bags folded and stacked like an altar. Their water bottles were opened and poured out in straight lines pointing toward the forest. Jennifer was fascinated. "This could be territorial marking," she said, taking photos from every angle. "Wolves sometimes arrange objects to claim territory." I found more of those impossible footprints, and this time I followed them. They led deeper into the woods, switching back and forth between human and wolf tracks. Sometimes the stride was normal, like a person walking. Other times it lengthened into the loping gait of a running wolf. The pattern made my hands shake. "We need to set up observation tonight," Jennifer said as we made camp near the third attack site. "If this pack is as territorial as I think, they'll return to check their kill zone." She spent an hour setting up motion cameras and digital recording equipment. The cameras had infrared capability and could stream footage to her tablet. The sound equipment could pick up frequencies that human ears couldn't detect. All top-of-the-line research gear. I prepared in my own way. I gathered sage and sweetgrass and burned them in the small fire, the way my grandfather taught me. I whispered the old words of protection and asked the spirits of my ancestors to watch over us. Jennifer thought I was just being traditional, honoring my culture. She had no idea I was terrified. As darkness fell, the forest went quiet. No owl calls, no rustling of small animals, no insect noise, just the crackling of our fire and Jennifer's equipment humming softly. Around midnight, the howling started. At first it sounded like normal wolves, but as I listened closer, the sounds were too organized. They were calling back and forth in patterns that reminded me of conversation. One would howl a series of notes, and another would answer with a different sequence. It was like they were planning something. Jennifer was recording everything, her face lit by the glow of her tablet screen. "This is incredible," she whispered. "The vocal patterns are unlike anything in the literature." That's when we saw them. The night vision cameras picked them up first, shapes moving through the trees about 50 yards from our camp. Jennifer's tablet showed 4 creatures approaching in a coordinated pattern. They moved upright on 2 legs, but their silhouettes were wrong. Too tall to be human, with elongated heads and arms that hung too low. "My God," Jennifer breathed, staring at the screen. "They're walking upright." As we watched, the creatures dropped to all fours and began circling our camp. The cameras followed their movement. They were huge, bigger than any wolf, with thick fur and powerful muscles. But their eyes reflected the infrared light with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. One of them stopped directly in front of a camera and stared into it. The face was like a wolf's, but the expression was unmistakably human. It tilted its head and opened its mouth, and what came out wasn't a howl. "Tommy, Tommy, where are you? I'm hurt, I need help." It was my voice. Perfect, exact, down to the accent and the way I pronounced certain words. Jennifer nearly dropped her tablet. Another creature called out from the opposite side of our camp. "Dr. Walsh, Jennifer, it's Dr. Morrison from the university. I'm injured out here," Jennifer's supervisor. The creature had somehow learned his voice, his manner of speaking. It was trying to lure us out of the safety of our fire. "What are they?" Jennifer whispered. I knew, but I could barely say the word. "Adlet." The creatures began testing our defenses. They picked up rocks and threw them at the edges of our camp, watching how we reacted. One found a broken branch and used it to prod at our gear, like it was trying to understand what each item was for. They were using tools, planning, thinking. Through the night vision, I watched one creature examine Jennifer's spare camera. It turned the device over in its hands, not paws, and figured out how to turn it on. The flash went off, and the creature immediately smashed the camera against a tree. "They know," I said. "They understand what the equipment does. They don't want evidence." Jennifer was shaking, but she kept recording. "This is the discovery of a lifetime, a species that shows this level of intelligence, using tools, coordinating attacks. They're not animals," I told her. "According to my grandfather's stories, they used to be human. Hikers, hunters, people who died alone in the wilderness. Their spirits merged with wolves, became something worse than either." The Adlet began calling out again, but now they were using the Tulmi, voices of Jennifer's research team, her family members, people she knew. They had somehow learned these voices, stored them, and now they were using them as weapons. As dawn approached, the creatures withdrew, but I knew they weren't gone. They were waiting, watching, planning their next move. Jennifer's equipment started malfunctioning, cameras going offline, sound equipment producing static, GPS units showing impossible locations. "We need to leave," I said, "now." But Jennifer refused. She was a scientist, and this was the find of a century. "We can't leave without more documentation. Think about what this means for our understanding of evolution, of consciousness itself." I tried to explain what my grandfather had told me about the Adlet. They grew stronger with each kill, adding the knowledge and voices of their victims to their pack intelligence. They had been hunting in these mountains for decades, maybe longer, claiming researchers and park officials who might expose their existence. The second night, they came closer. The pack had grown. Instead of 4, our cameras now showed 7 creatures. They moved with military precision, cutting off every escape route from our camp. They had studied us, learned our equipment, and now they were ready to hunt. One by one, our devices failed. The cameras went dark, the recording equipment filled with static, and our satellite radio produced only strange whispers in languages I didn't recognize. The Adlet were systematically destroying anything that could provide evidence of their existence. Jennifer finally understood when she saw one of the creatures using her own field notes to start a fire. It had somehow learned to read, or at least recognize that paper was flammable. The intelligence behind those wolf eyes was terrifying. We ran. The pack herded us like sheep, pushing us away from the main trails and deeper into the backcountry. Every time we tried to change direction, they cut us off, forcing us toward a narrow canyon that I knew was a dead end. They weren't just hunting us, they were thinking ahead, planning our doom. Using every tracking skill my family had taught me, I found a game trail that led up the canyon wall. It was steep, almost vertical in places, but it was our only chance. Jennifer's scientific equipment was useless here. We had to climb using nothing but determination and fear. The Adlet couldn't follow. Their wolf bodies weren't built for vertical climbing, and their human intelligence wasn't enough to overcome basic anatomy. But they didn't leave. They waited at the bottom of the cliff, howling in frustration, taking turns watching us with those horrible intelligent eyes. For 2 days, we clung to that cliff face without food or water. Jennifer's tablet was dead, her research ruined, her career's greatest discovery reduced to memories that no one would believe. Below us, the pack maintained their vigil with inhuman patience. On the 3rd day, we heard the helicopter. Jennifer had missed her check-in with the university, and they'd finally sent a search team. As we were airlifted out, I looked down and saw the Adlet pack melting back into the forest. They moved like smoke, disappearing between the trees as if they had never existed. The official report blamed the hikers' deaths on a rabid wolf pack that was never found. Jennifer's equipment was listed as lost in a fall, and our testimony was quietly buried in bureaucratic paperwork. The Park Service didn't want panic, and the university didn't want to lose research funding over what sounded like supernatural nonsense. Jennifer left Alaska a month later. She took a position at a university in Florida, as far from wolves and wilderness as she could get. She never published anything about what we saw, never spoke about it publicly. But sometimes, I get emails from her, usually late at night, asking if I still hear the howling. I still work at Denali, but I've changed my patrol routes. There are areas of the park I won't enter alone anymore. Sections marked as temporarily closed for wildlife research that will stay closed as long as I have any say in the matter. I've started teaching the younger rangers my grandfather's stories, disguised as cultural education and traditional knowledge sharing. Most of them think I'm just an old-timer preserving native folklore. But a few understand. They see it in my eyes when I talk about respecting the wilderness, about the things that live in the spaces between human knowledge and ancient truth. The Adlet are still out there. I know because sometimes, when the wind is right and the forest is too quiet, I can hear them calling. They use voices I recognize now, Jennifer's voice, my voice, the voices of hikers who went missing and were never found. They're more careful now, more selective. They learned from our encounter that some humans know their true nature. But they're patient and they're hungry, and they understand that eventually new people will come. Researchers, rangers, hikers who think they know these mountains. If you're planning to visit Denali, stick to the main trails. Don't camp alone. And if you hear your own voice calling to you from the darkness, don't answer. Don't follow. Just run and don't look back. Because the Adlet are always listening, always learning, and they never forget a voice once they've heard it. My name is David Tanami, and I've been a social worker for 12 years, specializing in missing children cases across Southeast Alaska. I'm Tlingit, born and raised in Juneau, and I know these waters, these forests, these communities like the back of my hand. I've worked hundreds of cases, runaways, custody disputes, actual abductions, and I thought I'd seen everything a kid could face out here. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the kushtaka, the otter spirits that steal children, but I always figured those were just old tales meant to keep kids away from dangerous water. What happened in October 2023 changed everything. I thought I knew about my job, my people, and what's really out there in the cold waters around Southeast Alaska. I work out of the state office in Sitka, covering about 15 remote villages scattered across hundreds of miles of islands and inlets. My trucks loaded with case files, a satellite phone, emergency supplies, and enough gas to reach the most isolated communities. Most days, I'm dealing with poverty, domestic issues, kids acting out because their parents are struggling. It's hard work, but it's important work. These communities trust me because I'm one of them, because I understand the balance between modern social services and traditional ways. The morning of October 12th started normal enough, rain drumming on my office windows, coffee getting cold while I reviewed case files, my supervisor Maria checking in about my weekly reports. Southeast Alaska in October means short days, constant rain, and kids stuck inside getting restless. But that morning, I got a call that would change everything. "David, we have a missing child in Angoon," Maria said, her voice tight with worry. 8-year-old Emma Cadleck. She disappeared yesterday evening while playing by Kootsnahu Creek. I grabbed my gear and drove the 30 minutes to catch the morning ferry to Angoon. The rain was coming down hard, turning the deck slick and making the crossing rougher than usual. I remember thinking this was probably a standard case. Kid wandered off, maybe fell asleep somewhere, scared to come home because she knew she'd be in trouble. Emma's parents, Tom and Sarah Cadleck, met me at the village dock. Tom worked at the local clinic. Sarah taught at the elementary school. Solid people. The kind who knew where their kid was supposed to be. But when I saw Sarah's face, red from crying, and Tom's hands shaking as he showed me Emma's shoes, I knew this wasn't standard. "We found these by the creek," Tom said, holding up a pair of small rain boots. Right at the water's edge, placed side by side like she took them off herself. The creek was running high from the rain, maybe 3 feet deep in the middle, moving fast toward the inlet. No way an 8-year-old survives falling in there, but no body downstream either. I spent 6 hours with the village search team, checking every building, every hiding spot, every place a scared kid might hole up. Nothing. That's when Emma's grandmother, Agnes, pulled me aside. "That child didn't run away," she said in Tlingit, then switched to English. "The Kushtaka took her. I can smell them on the water." I nodded respectfully, but inside I was thinking about statistics. 90% of missing kids are found within 24 hours. Most never leave their neighborhood. The Kushtaka were stories, not suspects. I filed my initial report that night, noting the unusual placement of the shoes and the lack of any physical evidence. But something felt wrong. In 12 years, I'd never seen a case where a kid just vanished without any trace, any clue, any reason. 2 weeks later, I got another call. Michael Sam, 10 years old, missing from Hoona. Same pattern, in X, playing alone near water, disappeared during rain, personal items left behind in a neat arrangement. This time it was his backpack, sitting perfectly upright on a log beside the school creek. I drove straight to Hoona, my stomach already twisting with a feeling I couldn't name. Michael's teacher, Mrs. Peterson, walked me to the spot where she'd last seen him. He was talking to someone by the creek during afternoon recess, she said. I could see him from the classroom window, having what looked like a normal conversation. When I went to call the kids in, Michael was gone, but his backpack was still there. Did you see who he was talking to? That's the strange part. From the window, it looked like another child about his age. But when I got outside, there was nobody else around. None of our other students were missing. I opened Michael's backpack and found something that made my blood run cold. Drawings. Dozens of them, all showing the same thing, was not 2.9 T. Underwater cities with glass domes, children swimming impossibly deep, kids living in air-filled bubbles beneath the sea. The detail was incredible, like architectural plans for a world that couldn't exist. When did Michael draw these? I asked his teacher. I've never seen them before. Michael was good at art, but these are way beyond his skill level. That night, I called my grandmother. Agnes Tanami was 93, one of the last native speakers of Tlingit in our region, keeper of the old stories. Grandmother, tell me about the Kushtaka again. Everything you know. She was quiet for a long moment. Why are you asking, grandson? Children are disappearing, near water. I need to understand. The Kushtaka are otter spirits, she said slowly. They can look like humans, like children playing. They smell like rain and seawater. They take lonely children, the ones who need friends, who dream of better places. They promise underwater cities where kids never grow up, never have chores, never get in trouble. But they're just stories, right? David, I'm 93 years old. I've seen things your textbooks don't explain. The DI-93. Kushtaka steal children and turn them into more Kushtaka. The changed children forget their families and help steal more kids. It's been happening for hundreds of years. I hung up feeling foolish for even considering it. But 2 days later, I interviewed 7-year-old Lucy Morris from Angoon, one of Emma's playmates. What she told me changed everything. Emma was playing with a boy by the creek the day before she went away. Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was pale and had really dark eyes. He smelled like rain. What were they doing? Playing breath-holding games. The boy could stay underwater for like 10 minutes. He taught Emma how to do it too. He said he knew a place where kids could play underwater all the time, where parents never made you come inside. Did you play with this boy too? Lucy nodded. He wanted me to come with them to the special place. He said children there never had to go to school or eat vegetables. But my mom called me for dinner, so I had to go home. Lucy's mother saved her life by calling her in for dinner. The third disappearance happened while I was investigating in Cake. 9-year-old Alex Paratrovich vanished during a family camping trip at Salt Chuck. By the time I got there, the family had been searching for 18 hours. Alex's dad, Robert, showed me the campsite. Their tent was set up about 50 yards from the water, Alex's sleeping bag still warm. He got up around midnight to use the bathroom, Robert explained. We heard him moving around, then nothing. When we woke up at dawn, he was gone. I walked the shoreline with my flashlight, looking for any sign of where Alex might have gone. That's when I found them. Tracks in the mud. Otter tracks, but wrong. Way too big for a normal sea otter, and mixed in with them were what looked like human handprints. Robert, look at these tracks. He crouched down beside me, studying the muddy impressions. Those prints are huge. And why are there human hands mixed in? The tracks led straight into the water and disappeared. On the other side of the inlet, more tracks led out of the water and up the beach before vanishing into the forest. That night, local fishermen reported something impossible. Children swimming underwater, far deeper than any human could survive, moving with the fluid grace of sea otters. The fishermen were experienced, reliable men who'd worked these waters for decades. They wouldn't make up something like that. I started noticing technology problems around the same time. My satellite phone would pick up calls that traced to coordinates hundreds of feet underwater. Parents reported getting calls from their missing children, voices that sounded exactly right, begging them to come to specific locations, always near water. The calls were impossible. I confirmed with the phone company. The signals originated from depths no technology could reach. But the voices were real, scared, asking for help in ways that broke parents' hearts. 2 weeks after Alex disappeared, I was investigating near Admiralty Island when my boat's fish finder started going crazy. The sonar showed massive schools of something moving in coordinated patterns 200 feet down. As I watched the screen, the shapes started rising toward the surface. That's when I saw them. Children broke the surface around my boat, but they weren't quite children anymore. Their skin had a gray, slick quality. Gills opened and closed on their necks. Their eyes were completely black, like a seal's eyes. But I recognized faces. Emma Cadleck, pale and changed, but definitely Emma. Michael Sam, his hair darker now, moving through the water like he'd been born to it. Mr. Tanami, Emma called out, her voice carrying that same sweet tone but with an echo like she was speaking from inside a cave. We're so happy here. The water is warm, and we can breathe underneath, and there's cities made of light, and we never have to sleep or eat gross food or listen to teachers. My hands were shaking as I gripped the boat's wheel. Emma, your parents are worried sick. They love you. They want you to come home. This is home now, Michael said, surfacing near the boat's port side. We help the Kushtaka find other lonely kids, kids who need friends, kids who want to see amazing things. Want to come with us, Mr. Tanami? The adult city is even better than the children's city. The changed children started circling my boat, their movements synchronized like a pod of dolphins. As they swam, they talked about the underwater world, the crystal palaces, schools of glowing fish, currents that carried you wherever you wanted to go. It sounded like paradise, and for a moment, I felt myself leaning toward the water. That's when my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Traditional songs, protection songs, prayers my people used to ward off spirits. I started singing in Tlingit, the old words. Coming back from childhood, the children in the water stopped circling. Emma's transformed face showed something like pain. "The old songs hurt," she said. "Why do you want to hurt us? We're trying to help you." "Because you're not really Emma anymore," I said, still singing between words. "The real Emma loved her parents and her dog in her bedroom with the pink walls. You're something else wearing her face. The lonely ones always come to us," she said as they started diving, disappearing back into the dark water. "More children need friends. More children want to see the beautiful places. We'll keep helping them." I gunned the engine and didn't stop until I reached Sitka Harbor. That was 8 months ago. I've reported everything to my supervisors, to state police, to the FBI. The official reports list the children as missing persons, probable drowning victims. The underwater phone calls are listed as hoaxes. The transformed children are hallucinations brought on by stress. But I know what I saw. I know what's taking our kids. I'm still working as a social worker, but now I spend half my time visiting schools, teaching water safety and traditional stories. I work with village elders to bring back the old songs, the protection rituals our grandparents knew. Some people think I've lost it, mixing folklore with child protective services. But the disappearances stopped after word spread about what to watch for. Pale children who smell like rain, who want to play breath-holding games, who promise amazing underwater adventures. The Kushtaka are still out there. They're patient, intelligent, and they've learned to use our technology against us. They prey on lonely children, kids who feel isolated or different, kids who dream of escaping to better places. In our modern world, that's a lot of children. I keep Emma's and Michael's and Alex's case files open. Officially, they're still missing. Unofficially, I know they're recruiting for the EK, things that took them, somewhere in the cold, dark waters of Southeast Alaska. If you work with children, if you live near water, remember this. Not every child playing alone by the water is human. Not every friend your kid meets is safe. And if a child ever promises to show your son or daughter how to breathe underwater, run. The Kushtaka are real, and they're always looking for more children to join their underwater cities. The only protection we have left are the old songs, the traditional knowledge our ancestors used to keep their children safe. Some cases never close. Some missing children are never found because they don't want to be found anymore. My name is Rebecca Ernick, and I've been teaching elementary school for 8 years. I grew up in Utqiagvik, what most people still call Barrow, and I came back home after college to help preserve our Inuit culture for the next generation. I teach 3rd and 4th grade at our local school, mixing regular subjects like math and reading with traditional stories and customs. I've handled difficult students, budget cuts, and parents who think I'm too young to understand their kids. But what happened during the polar night of 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about the old stories. Sometimes the legends our elders tell us aren't just stories at all. Utqiagvik sits at the very top of Alaska, where the Arctic Ocean meets the land. From mid-November to late January, the sun doesn't rise at all. We call it polar night, and it's something you never really get used to. The darkness feels alive here, pressing against your windows, making even familiar streets seem foreign. Our school is a simple building with thick walls and triple-pane windows to keep out the cold. The hallways smell like industrial cleaner and that musty odor that old buildings get when they're heated constantly. I'd been planning my cultural unit for months. The school board was pushing us to include more traditional content, and I wanted to do it right. I'd interviewed elders, gathered stories, and prepared lessons about traditional hunting, storytelling, and yes, shamanism. The kids loved hearing about the old ways, especially during the long dark months when there wasn't much else to do after school. It was December 3rd when I first taught them about Tornarsuk spirits. The classroom felt smaller that day, maybe because of the heavy snowfall outside. I had the children sitting in a circle on the carpet while I told them about the powerful spirits that Inuit shamans used to communicate with. According to our ancestors, Tornarsuk were helper spirits that could grant incredible abilities, but they demanded complete loyalty from anyone they chose. Miss Ernick, 8-year-old James Aknavigak raised his hand. Are the spirits still around? I smiled, thinking it was just curiosity. The elders say all spirits are still here, James. We just don't listen the same way our ancestors did. That was my first mistake. The next morning, James arrived at school an hour early. I found him sitting in the dark classroom, staring out the window at the swirling snow. James, how did you get in? The building was locked. He turned to me with an odd expression. There's going to be a big storm tomorrow night, really big. The ice spirits told me. I checked the weather forecast during my prep period. Light snow was predicted for the rest of the week. Nothing about a storm. 2 days later, the worst blizzard in 5 years hit Utqiagvik. The weather service hadn't seen it coming until 6 hours before it arrived. James had been right. How did you know about the death? Storm? I asked him the next week. I can hear them whispering, he said simply. The spirits in the ice. They know what the wind is going to do. I should have contacted his parents then. Instead, I was curious. The changes started slowly. James began drawing incredibly detailed weather patterns during art time. When I looked at them next to satellite images online, they matched perfectly. Sarah Uki, one of my quieter students, stopped wearing her heavy winter coat. Even when the temperature dropped to 40 below, she'd walk between buildings in just a light jacket. Aren't you cold? I asked her one afternoon. The polar bear spirit keeps me warm, she said, like she was talking about the weather. I thought it was just imagination until I touched her hand. Her skin was perfectly warm, even though she'd just come in from outside. Tommy Najiak started having conversations with the ravens that perched outside our classroom window. At first, I thought he was just playing. Then the ravens started responding. They'd cock their heads when he whispered, call back at specific moments, and sometimes fly away, only to return with other birds. During our nature walk to look for animal tracks, a small herd of caribou approached Tommy directly, showing no fear at all. What are they saying? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. They say the Johnsons will find a seal at the breathing hole near the old church tomorrow, Tommy replied, and that Mrs. Peterson's husband is coming home early from hunting. Both predictions turned out to be true. By late December, I realized the 3 children had stopped playing with their classmates. They sat together during lunch, whispering in Inuktitut dialects I barely recognized. Some of the words sounded ancient, like the formal language only the oldest elders used for ceremonies. They moved differently too, with a strange precision that reminded me of the traditional dancers I'd seen at cultural dance festivals. Other parents started calling me. Rebecca, what are you teaching these kids? Mrs. Aknavigak sounded worried. James told me he doesn't need to play anymore because he has important work to do. Sarah won't eat anything cooked. Mr. Uki complained. She only wants raw fish and seal meat, says cooked food makes the spirits angry. I tried to explain that we were just learning about culture, but the complaints kept coming. During our January parent conference, the room felt tense. Several families demanded to know why their children were acting so strangely. That's when Elder Mary Kanguk spoke up. She was Tommy's grandmother and one of the most respected people in our community. Rebecca, she said quietly, you need to stop teaching about Tornarsuk. It's just cultural education, I protested. Stories from our heritage. Elder Kanguk shook her head. Some stories aren't meant to be shared lightly. Tornarsuk don't just inspire children, they choose them. And once chosen, a child belongs to the spirit world more than the human world. I laughed it off then. I had a bachelor's degree in education and a minor in anthropology. I understood the difference between cultural beliefs and reality. Another mistake. The next week, the children's abilities became impossible to ignore. James predicted the exact time and location where a lost hunter would be found, down to the minute. Sarah walked outside during a blizzard, wearing only a t-shirt, and returned an hour later completely unharmed. Tommy started guiding adults to the best hunting and fishing spots with perfect accuracy. The community began relying on them. People would ask James about weather before planning trips. They'd consult Tommy about where to find game. Some even brought offerings to Sarah, treating her like a traditional healer. The children accepted this attention as their due, speaking less and less to anyone outside their small group. I found them. After school one day, sitting in the dark classroom without any lights on. They were arranging small objects on the floor in complex patterns, pieces of bone, stones, and what looked like carved ivory. "What are you doing?" "Preparing," James said without looking up. "The awakening comes when the sun returns." "What awakening?" Sarah finally glanced at me. Her eyes looked different, older somehow. "The ice is melting. The old spirits trapped in the permafrost are waking up. They need us to guide them." I confiscated their materials and called their parents for immediate pickup. That night, I went through all my cultural teaching materials and locked them in my desk. Something was very wrong. The winter solstice came on December 21st. I arrived at school early to prepare for our traditional longest night celebration. I found the 3 children already there, along with 5 other students I hadn't invited. They were standing in a circle in the center of the classroom, holding hands and chanting in a language that made my skin crawl. "Stop this right now!" I shouted, rushing toward them. James looked at me, but it wasn't James anymore. His voice was deep, ancient, speaking with an accent I'd never heard. The teacher tried to wake us but lacks the strength to contain us. We honor her attempt. Sarah's head tilted in an unnatural way. The children were willing vessels. Now they served the greater purpose. Tommy stepped forward, but his movements were too smooth, too controlled. The earth changes. The ice retreats. We must prepare for what rises from the deep permafrost. I grabbed the nearest student, little Amy Kinnear, and pulled her away from the circle. The 3 possessed children didn't try to stop me, just watched with those 2 old eyes as I herded the other kids out of the room. "Call the police," I shouted to the janitor. "Get their parents." When the authorities arrived, James, Sarah, and Tommy were gone. The janitor swore he never saw them leave, but the classroom was empty. They hadn't been seen since. I reported everything to the principal, the school board, and the state education department. Everyone agreed the children had been experiencing some kind of group psychological episode. James, Sarah, and Tommy were officially listed as runaways, though search teams found no trace of them despite the snow showing perfect tracking conditions. I burnt all my cultural teaching materials that night. Every story, every lesson plan, every handout about traditional shamanism went into my fireplace. The elders were right. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share casually. I transferred to Anchorage the following semester. I still teach, but I stick to math, science, and reading now. No more cultural units, no more traditional stories. But sometimes, late at night, I check the weather reports from Utqiagvik. When they predict sudden storms or unusual animal behavior, I remember James's voice telling me the ice spirits whisper the wind's plans. The predictions are still coming true, even though he's been missing for almost 2 years now. The climate scientists say the Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on Earth. Ancient permafrost is melting, releasing things that have been frozen for thousands of years. Most people think about carbon dioxide and methane. I think about what else might be waking up in that thawing ground, and I wonder if 3 children are still out there somewhere, guiding it home. My name is Maria Kanguk, and I've been a police officer with the Nome Police Department for 7 years. I'm a Inupiat, born and raised right here in Nome, Alaska. I know every street, every trail, every hidden shortcut in this town. I've handled bar fights, domestic calls, drunk snowmobilers, and tourists who wandered too far from their hotels. I've pulled people out of -40-degree weather more times than I can count. But what happened in February 2024 made me realize that sometimes the Arctic cold doesn't just kill you. Sometimes it takes you somewhere else. And I'm not sure which is worse. I grew up hearing the old stories from my grandmother. Stories about spirits in the ice, about things that walk during blizzards. Like most kids, I thought they were just tales to keep us from going out during storms. Then I became a cop, and I learned that real dangers are much simpler. Hypothermia, whiteout conditions, getting lost 50 feet from your own front door. I was wrong about what's really out there. February in Nome is brutal. The sun barely shows up, the wind cuts through every layer you wear, and the temperature sits somewhere between painful and deadly. But people here know how to survive. We're not stupid tourists. We're born into this cold. That's why the disappearances made no sense. It started on February 8th. Robert Nash, 52 years old, veteran snowplow driver. The guy had been clearing Nome streets for 25 years. He knew cold weather survival better than anyone. His wife called 911 at 3 in the morning, hysterical. Robert had walked out of their house during a full whiteout blizzard, in his pajamas, wearing house slippers. When I arrived at their home on Front Street, the wind was so strong I could barely open my patrol car door. Snow came at me sideways, stinging my face even through my balaclava. The temperature was -45, not counting wind chill. Nobody goes outside in this, not even for 30 seconds. But Robert's footprints led straight from his front door toward the Bering Sea. I followed them with my flashlight, trudging through knee-deep snow. The prints were clear at first, normal walking stride. No stumbling, no hesitation, like he was taking a casual stroll on a summer day. Then, about 200 yards from his house, right where the residential area meets the beach access road, the footprints just stopped. Not like the snow had covered them. They just ended. Middle of a drift, like Robert had been plucked up into the sky. I searched for 3 hours that night. Found nothing. When dawn finally came, we brought in search and rescue teams, dogs, even a helicopter from Anchorage. They found nothing either. Robert Nash had vanished into the storm like smoke. His wife, Susan, was barely holding it together when I interviewed her the next day. Her hands shook as she poured coffee. He'd been acting strange for a week, she told me. Standing at the window, staring out at the snow. I'd ask him what he was looking at, and he'd say, "Don't you hear it?" "Hear what?" I asked. "A voice." He said it was his father's voice. She started crying. But his father died 10 years ago. Robert said the voice was calling him, telling him to come home to the ice. She showed me drawings Robert had made, sketched on the back of junk mail, on napkins, on the margins of the TV guide. All the same image. A tall figure standing on frozen water. The figure was human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too thin, too pale. In every drawing, it had its arms stretched out, welcoming. I took photos of everything and filed my report. The official conclusion was hypothermia-induced delirium. It happens. People get confused, wander off, freeze to death. We'd find Robert's body when the snow melted in spring, except we never did. And then Sarah Olana disappeared the exact same way. Sarah was 34, a teller at Wells Fargo. Grew up here, just like me. Her neighbor, old Mrs. Peterson, called it in on February 15th. She'd seen Sarah walking down the middle of the street at midnight during another blizzard. Barefoot, in her nightgown. She didn't look cold at all, Mrs. Peterson told me, her voice shaking. She walked like she was going somewhere important, like she had an appointment to keep. Sarah's apartment told a different story. Her journal was open on her kitchen table. The last few pages were filled with descriptions of something she called the beautiful cold man. She wrote about dreams, about someone visiting her while she slept, about a voice promising her peace, rest, eternal winter quiet. The last entry, written hours before she vanished, just said, "He's calling me home now. I'm ready to go to the ice palace." I stood in that apartment, reading those words by flashlight because the power had gone out, and felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. Two experienced locals. Both walked into killing weather wearing almost nothing. Both talked about voices, about being called. Both left behind drawings or writings about the same thing. A figure on the ice. I started pulling reports from other communities along the coast. 3 more disappearances in the past month. Same pattern, Shishmaref, Teller, Brevig Mission, all during blizzards. All experienced Arctic residents, all talking about dreams and voices before they vanished. I brought everything to Chief Hawkins. He looked at my file for about 5 minutes, then closed it. "Maria, people freeze to death. It's tragic, but it happens." "Not like this," I insisted. "These aren't tourists. These are people who got hypothermia and wandered off." Case closed. He handed the file back. "We don't have the budget to chase ghost stories." So I started investigating on my own time. Elder Joseph Ayatunguk lives in a small house near the cemetery. He's 93 years old, and he's forgotten more about traditional Inupiat culture than I'll ever know. When I showed him Robert's drawings and Sarah's journal, his face went gray. "Tornrak," he whispered. "Ice spirit." But wrong. This one is different. He explained that the old stories talked about ice spirits that lived in the frozen sea. Usually, they stayed away from humans. Sometimes, they'd help hunters. But this one was angry. "The ice is dying," he said, pointing toward the window, toward the Bering Sea. "Every year it melts sooner, stays frozen less. The spirits feel it. This one is taking people to keep the cold alive." "How?" I asked. "It takes their heat, their warmth, traps them in the ice forever, keeping them alive inside. That way, the cold never dies." He looked at me with ancient eyes. "It speaks with the voices of the dead to lure them. Once they hear it, the spirit knows their pain, knows what they miss, what they want, and it uses that to call them into the storm." "How do I stop it?" He shook his head. "You don't. You survive it. Or you don't." I started staking out residential areas during blizzard warnings. Nome doesn't have many street cameras, so I set up my own. Night vision equipment, motion sensors. I parked my patrol car in different spots each night, watching through thermal imaging. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, February 23rd, I was parked near the elementary school when my motion sensor went off. I looked at the tablet showing my camera feeds. Something was moving down 2nd Avenue. Through the thermal camera, it appeared as a cold spot. Not just cold, it was actually darker than the surrounding snow, a human-shaped absence of heat gliding across the street. It didn't walk. It moved smoothly, like it was ice skating, leaving no footprints in the fresh snow. It stopped in front of a house, stood at the window, just stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Then it moved to the next house, and the next. It was looking for someone. I drove closer, slowly. The thing didn't seem to notice my car. Through my windshield, without the thermal camera, I could barely see it. Just a pale shape in the blowing snow, tall and thin. When it turned toward a window, I saw its face. It looked human, but its features were too smooth, too perfect, like someone had carved a person from ice and that ice had started to move. My radio crackled with static. Then, through the static, I heard my grandmother's voice. "Maria, come home, come to the ice." I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I need, come home, Maria. It's warm here. You'll never hurt again." That wasn't dispatch. That was my grandmother's voice. My grandmother, who died when I was 16. The figure turned and looked directly at my car. I hit the gas and got out of there. That's when the dream started. Every night, I'd dream I was walking across endless ice. The wind didn't hurt. The cold felt good, peaceful. And my grandmother was there, walking beside me, holding my hand like she did when I was little. "You work too hard, Maria," she'd say. "Always worrying, always fighting. Come rest with us. Come home." I'd wake up at my front door, fully dressed in my warmest clothes, my hand on the doorknob. One night, I woke up outside on my porch, boots on, car keys in my hand. The thing was getting inside my head. I called in sick for 2 days. Didn't sleep. Kept every light in my apartment on. Drank coffee until my hands shook. I knew if I fell asleep again, I might not wake up inside. I might wake up outside, walking into the storm. On the 3rd night, dispatch called. "Maria, we've got multiple 911 calls. People seeing someone walking toward the sea ice, out past the breakwater." I knew what it was, and I knew I had to follow. The storm that night was one of the worst I'd ever seen. Wind gusts at 70 miles per hour. Visibility about 10 feet. Temperature -50. I suited up in every piece of cold weather gear I owned, grabbed my most powerful flashlight, and headed toward the breakwater. I found fresh footprints leading out onto the sea ice. Multiple sets, all heading in the same direction. I followed them for maybe half a mile. The ice groaned under my feet, wind screamed in my ears. My flashlight beam barely cut through the snow. I was about to turn back when I saw them, a circle of people standing on the ice. I counted 6. They stood perfectly still, arms at their sides. As I got closer, my flashlight showed me the truth. They were encased in ice. Clear, smooth ice, covering their entire bodies like glass. But they were alive. I could see their eyes moving, their chests rising and falling with shallow breaths. Sarah Olana, Robert Nash. The others from the missing person reports, all of them staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. They couldn't move, couldn't speak, just trapped inside the ice, completely aware. In the center of the circle stood the ice walker. Up close, it was beautiful and horrible. Perfectly formed. Its skin looked like frosted glass. Its eyes were white, with no pupils. When it spoke, its mouth didn't move, but I heard the words clearly. In my grandmother's voice, "Maria, you came." "Let them go," I said. My voice shook, and not from the cold. They chose to come. They wanted peace. I gave it to them. It moved closer. The temperature around me dropped even further. Frost formed on my goggles. Your people forgot how to respect the cold. You fight it, you hide from it. But I remember. I preserve those who remember. I keep their warmth alive in eternal ice. They're suffering. They're eternal. The ice is dying, Maria. Every year, less of it. Soon, there will be nothing left. But I keep it alive through them, through their warmth, their life. It reached out one hand. Join us. Join your grandmother. Stop fighting. Just sleep. I felt the pull. The desire to just let go. To stop being cold, stop being tired, stop carrying everything alone. My hand moved toward my radio without me telling it to. Muscle memory from 7 years on the force. I pressed the emergency button and said the coordinates. Officer needs assistance. Sea ice. Half-mile past breakwater. The ice walker's face twisted with something that might have been anger. You called them, it said. More will come now. More to join us. No, I said. They're coming to help me. That's what we do. I heard the helicopter before I saw it. Coast Guard, responding to the emergency call. Their spotlight hit the ice, and the ice walker turned toward it. For just a second, it looked uncertain. Afraid, maybe. Then it stepped backward. The ice beneath it cracked. It sank down, and the people in their ice shells sank with it, pulled under like they weighed nothing. In 3 seconds, they were gone. Just dark water and broken ice where they'd been standing. The Coast Guard pulled me off the ice. I tried to tell them what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. They searched for hours. Found nothing. Just me, alone on the ice, hypothermic and barely conscious. The official report says I experienced severe hypothermia and hallucinations. Chief Hawkins put me on administrative leave. For my own good, I resigned instead. The missing people are still listed as missing. Their families still wait for answers I can't give them, because who would believe me? But I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. I moved to Anchorage last month. I sleep with every light on. I check the weather obsessively. When it snows, I stay inside, door locked, windows covered. Because sometimes, on really cold nights, I still hear my grandmother's voice in the wind, still calling me home to the ice. My name is Carlos Rivera, and I've been maintaining trails in Alaska's Tongass National Forest for 8 years now. Before this job, I spent 6 years as a botanist, studying plant ecosystems in the Pacific Northwest. I took this position because I wanted to combine my love of science with outdoor work, documenting the incredible biodiversity of America's largest national forest. I've dealt with everything from aggressive brown bears to tourists lost in blizzards, but what happened in August 2024 near Mendenhall Glacier changed everything I thought I knew about plant life. Some things in nature aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be feared. The Tongass stretches across 17 million acres of southeastern Alaska, and my section covers about 200 square miles of trails around Juneau. Most days, I'm out there with my maintenance truck, checking trail conditions, clearing fallen trees, and updating the GPS markers that help hikers navigate safely. My equipment is pretty basic. A chainsaw, hand tools, radio, GPS unit, and a field tablet for logging maintenance reports. The Forest Service requires detailed documentation of everything, from trail erosion to wildlife sightings. August started normally enough. Tourist season was winding down, which meant fewer rescue calls and more time for actual maintenance work. The weather had been unusually warm and wet, perfect growing conditions for the moss and lichen that normally carpet the forest floor. I was working the Mendenhall Glacier Trail System, a popular day hike route that connects several scenic viewpoints. It's about 12 miles of well-maintained paths through old-growth forest, with wooden bridges crossing the smaller creeks. On August 15th, I was doing routine trail clearing near Marker 47, about 3 miles from the glacier overlook. That's where I first noticed something strange. The moss around the base of a massive Sitka spruce had formed this perfect spiral pattern, like someone had drawn it with a compass. In my years as a botanist, I'd never seen moss grow in such precise geometric shapes. Natural growth is random, chaotic. This looked intentional. I knelt down to examine it closer, pulling out my field magnifier. The moss felt warm under my gloved hands, which was odd since the morning air was still cool. When I pressed down on one section, the entire spiral seemed to contract slightly, like muscle tissue responding to pressure. I grabbed my tablet and started documenting what I was seeing. The moss was a brilliant emerald green, much brighter than the typical varieties we get in Southeast Alaska. Over the next few days, I found similar formations scattered throughout my section. Always the same perfect spirals, always around the largest trees. By August 20th, I documented 17 separate locations, all within a 5-mile radius of that first sighting. What bothered me most was how fast they were spreading. Moss doesn't grow that quickly. It takes years to establish significant colonies. These patches were appearing overnight. I started taking samples back to my cabin for analysis. Under my old microscope, the cellular structure looked wrong. The cell walls were too thick, and there were these strange filaments running through the moss like tiny veins. It reminded me more of animal tissue than plant matter. When I tried to dry a sample for preservation, it released this sweet, cloying smell that made my head spin. By the end of August, the moss formations had connected into larger patches along the main trail corridors. They were growing in straight lines between trees, creating these green pathways that seemed to guide hikers in specific directions. Some trails that had been perfectly clear the week before were now blocked by thick moss barriers that reached waist-high. The first hikers started getting sick around Labor Day weekend. Nothing serious at first, just dizziness and nausea when walking through the tight life. Moss-covered sections. They'd report feeling dehydrated even though they were carrying plenty of water. The medical center in Juneau couldn't find anything specific wrong with them. Their blood work came back normal, but they all complained about the same thing: an overwhelming urge to lie down and rest whenever they saw the bright green moss. I collected more samples and sent them to the university lab in Anchorage. The results came back 3 weeks later, and they made no sense. The lab tech called me personally because she'd never seen anything like it. The moss contained proteins that don't exist in any known plant species. The cellular structure showed characteristics of both plant and animal tissue, with these neural-like pathways running throughout. Most disturbing was the DNA analysis. There were genetic sequences that didn't match anything in their database. The really strange part was how the moss reacted to damage. When I cut a section for sampling, it would release these tiny spores that burned my throat and made my eyes water. Within hours, the damaged area would be completely healed, often growing back thicker than before. It was like the moss was learning from each injury, developing better defenses. October brought the first missing hiker. Sarah Chen, a photographer from Seattle, was documenting fall colors along the Nugget Creek Trail. Her car was found at the trailhead, but she never returned. The search team found her camera equipment about 2 miles in, sitting in the middle of one of the largest moss formations I'd ever seen. The moss had grown around the tripod legs, partially absorbing the metal into its structure. Her backpack was there too, but it looked like it had been partially dissolved. The fabric was breaking down while the zippers and metal frames remained intact. We never found Sarah's body. More hikers went missing through October and November. Each time, their gear would turn up embedded in moss, formations that seemed to be processing the organic materials while preserving anything synthetic or metallic. The Park Service started restricting access to certain trails, officially citing hazardous trail conditions, but they wouldn't listen when I tried to explain what was really happening. The moss was hunting. I started staying late to observe the formations after dark. What I saw changed everything. The moss wasn't passive, it was actively mobile. Thin tendrils would emerge from the main patches, reaching out like fingers to grab insects and small animals. I watched a squirrel get caught by one of these tendrils. The moss wrapped around it slowly, almost gently, and over the course of about 10 minutes, the animal just dissolved. The moss absorbed everything organic while leaving behind only the small metal tag from a previous research study. By December, the formations had grown massive. Some covered entire clearings, rising several feet high in complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. The moss had developed this pulsing rhythm, like a slow heartbeat visible across acres of forest. Walking near these areas made me feel drowsy and confused. Several times, I caught myself lying down in the moss without remembering how I got there. The organism was affecting my mind. I started carrying oxygen tanks and wearing a respirator when working near the moss zones. The spores it released seemed designed to incapacitate humans, making us docile and compliant. Under their influence, lying down in the moss felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home after a long journey. The breakthrough came in January when I found the impact crater. Following a GPS anomaly that had been bothering me for months, I hiked into a remote section that showed up wrong on all my maps. Hidden beneath decades of normal forest growth was a circular depression about 50 yards across. At the center, the moss grew in patterns so complex, they seemed almost technological. This wasn't terrestrial plant life, it was something else entirely. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed what I suspected. Buried under the moss was metallic debris consistent with a meteorite impact. Dating the surrounding tree growth, I estimated the object had crashed here sometime in the 1970 seconds. For 50 years, this thing had been slowly converting the forest ecosystem, turning earth plants and animals into something compatible with its biology. The moss wasn't just growing, it was terraforming. I tried reporting my findings to every agency I could think of. The Park Service transferred me to different departments until I gave up. The university researchers thought I was having a breakdown. Even my supervisor suggested I take some time off to deal with stress-related paranoia. Nobody wanted to hear that we had an alien organism systematically converting one of America's largest forests. By March, the moss had adapted to every countermeasure I could think of. When I tried burning sections, it developed flame-resistant properties. Chemical treatments just made it produce neutralizing enzymes. It was learning from each interaction, becoming more sophisticated with every challenge. The organism was too intelligent, too adaptable for any conventional approach. The real horror hit me in April when I realized the moss was specifically targeting me. Patches began appearing around my cabin overnight, always in perfect geometric patterns that seemed designed to channel my movements in specific directions. The spores it released in my presence were different now, more concentrated, more psychoactive. It knew I was the primary threat to its expansion. One morning, I woke up standing in my garden, staring down at a perfect spiral of moss that had grown around my feet during the night. I have no memory of going outside. The moss had somehow called to me in my sleep, drawing me out to become part of its collection. Only the sharp pain of my radio's emergency alarm snapped me back to consciousness. That's when I realized I was fighting a losing battle. The organism had moved beyond the forest boundaries. Satellite imagery showed moss formations spreading into residential areas around Juneau. Gardens and lawns were being slowly converted, one property at a time. Pet cats and dogs that played on infected grass developed strange lethargy and eventually disappeared entirely. The moss was patient, gradually conditioning the entire ecosystem to accept its presence. Local doctors started seeing children with respiratory problems and unusual behavioral changes. Kids who lived near moss-infected areas would sleepwalk into their yards and lie down in the green patches, remaining there until their parents found them hours later. The children always claimed they were just resting and couldn't explain why they'd left their beds. I stopped filing official reports after my supervisor threatened termination for persistent filing of false documentation. Instead, I focused on detailed personal records, documenting the organism's expansion patterns and behavioral adaptations. Someone needed to maintain a record of what was really happening, even if the authorities refused to acknowledge it. The moss continued learning. When families installed motion sensor lights to monitor their yards, the organism developed bioluminescent properties that mimicked normal lighting. When people used herbicides, it evolved to break down the chemicals into nutrients. Every human response just made it stronger and more sophisticated. By summer 2025, I'd given up trying to stop the expansion. The organism covered nearly 30 square miles of forest and was spreading into 3 separate residential districts. It had evolved beyond anything Earth's ecosystem could naturally resist. Fighting it was like trying to stop evolution itself. I still maintain the remaining uninfected trails, documenting the organism's progress for whatever scientists might eventually study this phenomenon. The moss allows me to work in its territory now, perhaps recognizing that I'm no longer a threat to its expansion. Sometimes I think it appreciates having an observer, someone to witness its magnificent biological achievement. The hunger moss of Tongass Forest is still spreading. It's patient, intelligent, and completely alien to everything we understand about life on Earth. In another decade, it will probably control the entire Southeast Alaska ecosystem. After that, who knows how far it will spread. I'm 43 years old now, and I've been keeping this secret for over a year. The organism has taught me that humans aren't the dominant species we think we are. We're just another biological resource, no different from the deer and birds it processes to fuel its growth. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear it calling to me from the forest. The sound is beautiful, like a lullaby made of wind through moss-covered trees. Part of me wants to answer that call, to walk into the green spirals and finally rest after years of fighting something I could never defeat. But not yet. Someone needs to keep documenting what's happening here. Someone needs to witness the Earth's transformation into something new and alien. The moss can wait. It has all the time in the world. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a search and rescue coordinator for Anchorage Emergency Services for 8 years now. Before that, I spent 6 years working construction around Alaska, hell of building homes, clearing roads, working with my hands in some of the most remote places you can imagine. I switched to search and rescue after losing 2 good friends in a climbing accident up near Denali. They were experienced climbers, knew the mountains better than most, but the wilderness doesn't care how skilled you are. I figured if I was going to keep working in these mountains, I might as well help bring people home safe. I've coordinated over 300 rescue operations in that time. Missing hikers, injured climbers, hunters who got turned around in bad weather. I've seen hypothermia, bear attacks, rock slides, pretty much every way the Alaskan wilderness can hurt you. Our team has pulled people out of situations that should have killed them, and we've recovered bodies from places that seemed impossible to reach. But what happened in Chugach State Park during July of 2023 changed everything I thought I knew about what's really out there in those mountains. The first report came in on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in our office going through equipment inventory when the phone rang. It was Lisa Chen, a dental hygienist from Anchorage. She'd been hiking the Rabbit Lake Trail with 3 friends over the weekend, and she sounded shaky, like she hadn't slept much. "Something followed us up there," she said. "Something big. Really big. I get calls like this maybe once a month. Usually it's bears. Sometimes it's just shadows and overactive imagination." But Lisa wasn't hysterical, NET. She was scared, but trying to be precise about what she'd seen. We were about 4 miles up the trail when we started hearing rocks being thrown. Not rolling down naturally, thrown. Like someone was chucking them to get our attention. We'd stop, look around, see, nothing. Then it would happen again from a different direction. Lisa said this went on for about 3 hours. Every time they tried to take a shortcut or explore a side trail, rocks would come flying from that direction, like something was herding them back to the main path. Her friend Mike, who'd done some tracking in the Army, found footprints near where the rocks were coming from. 18 inches long, Lisa said, with what looked like thumbs. Mike said they were fresh, maybe an hour old. But here's the weird part. They led us toward all the dead-end trails, like whatever made them knew the area better than we did. I took down her information and filed a report, but honestly, I figured it was just another Bigfoot sighting. We get them every summer when the hiking season starts. City folks head up into the mountains, see some shadows, hear some sounds they can't explain, and suddenly Alaska's got another cryptid. But then more reports started coming in. 3 days later, Tom Rodriguez called. Tom's been guiding climbers and hunters around Alaska for 20 years. If anyone knows the difference between a bear and something else, it's Tom. He'd been leading a group up the South Fork Trail when they had an encounter that left him rattled. "This thing wasn't just big, Jake," Tom said. "It was smart, smarter than any animal I've ever seen." Tom's group had made camp near Eagle Lake. During the night, something had methodically destroyed their equipment. Not torn apart like a bear would do, carefully dismantled. Their GPS unit was taken apart piece by piece, with the components scattered in a perfect circle around their tent. The satellite phone was smashed, but their food supplies weren't touched at all. "It wanted us lost," Tom said. "Cut off. No way to call for help or navigate out. But it didn't want our food. That's not normal animal behavior." I was starting to pay attention. Tom's been in situations with aggressive wildlife before, and he'd never sounded spooked like this. Plus, the details were consistent with Lisa's report. Hell, something showing intelligence, understanding human technology, and demonstrating strategic thinking. Over the next 2 weeks, we got 6 more similar reports, all from experienced outdoors people, all describing the same thing, something massive, covered in dark hair, walking upright, but showing problem-solving abilities that went way beyond normal animal intelligence. Then 3 hikers went missing. Sarah Walsh, Mike Turner, and David Kim had gone up the Flattop Mountain Trail on a Friday morning. They were supposed to be back by Sunday evening. When they didn't show up Monday morning, their families called us. I assembled a search team, myself, 2 other coordinators named Beth and Carlos, plus 4 volunteers from the local climbing club. We headed up to their last known position Tuesday at dawn, expecting to find injured hikers or people who'd gotten turned around in bad weather. What we found instead was something that made my skin crawl. Their campsite looked like it had been studied. The tents were intact, but everything inside had been laid out in neat piles. Clothes, food, camping gear, all separated by type and arranged in perfect rows. Their backpacks were set up in a triangle about 50 feet from the tents, with personal items removed and organized nearby. But the personal stuff, wallets, phones, jewelry, that was gone. Carlos found tracks leading away from the camp. They matched the descriptions from earlier reports. 18 inches long, deep impressions, with what looked like an opposable thumb. But these tracks led to something that made us all stop and stare. Trees around the camp had scratch marks carved into the bark. Not random scratches, deliberate marks that looked like crude maps. They showed the trail system, with X marks at specific locations. When we checked our topographic maps, those X marks corresponded exactly to dead-end trails, cliff drop-offs, and areas where people could easily get trapped. "It's been hunting here for a while," Beth said quietly. "This isn't random." We followed the tracks deeper into the mountains and found something that still gives me nightmares. About 3 miles from the original campsite, tucked into a cave system that doesn't show up on any official maps, we discovered what I can only describe as a collection. Dozens of wallets, phones, and pieces of jewelry, all arranged in neat piles, just like at the campsite. But these items clearly came from different time periods. Some of the phones were old flip models from 15 years ago. Some were recent smartphones. The wallets contained IDs dating back to 2008. I did the math in my head. If each set of items represented missing people who'd never been found, we were looking at evidence of maybe 30 victims over the past 15 years. All in the same general area, all with the same careful, methodical collection behavior. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with an animal at all. We were dealing with something that had been systematically hunting humans in these mountains for over a decade. We decided to make camp and continue searching the next day. That's when things got really terrifying. Around 10 o'clock that night, we started hearing voices calling for help. Clear, human voices, shouting our names from different directions in the darkness. At first, we thought we'd found the missing hikers, so we grabbed our flashlights and started moving toward the sounds. "Jake, over here, help me." It was Sarah Walsh's voice, coming from a ravine about 200 yards north of our camp. But when we got there, we found nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there recently. Then we heard Mike Turner's voice from the opposite direction. "Help, I'm trapped. Can anyone hear me?" But as we listened more carefully, something was wrong with the timing. The voices were perfect. Exactly right pitch and tone, but the words came just a half second too late, like someone playing back a recording. "Nobody respond," I whispered into the radio. "Those aren't our missing hikers." For the next 2 hours, we heard our own names being called in voices that belonged to our family members. My dead mother's voice calling, "Jakey, where are you?" Beth heard her daughter asking for help. Carlos heard his brother, who lives in Seattle, shouting directions to our location. The thing had somehow learned our voices, our names, probably even our family connections, and it was using that information to try to separate us from the group. The next morning, we discovered that our vehicles had been sabotaged, not destroyed, carefully disabled. Battery cables were cut with surgical precision. Spark plug wires were removed and hidden, but our headlights still worked, and our emergency supplies were left untouched. Just like with Tom's group, it wanted us stranded but alive. That's when I realized this thing wasn't just hunting randomly. It was intelligent enough to understand human technology, patient enough to study our behavior, and strategic enough to eliminate our advantages before attacking. We tried to radio for backup, but all our communication equipment was dead. Not broken, the power indicators showed they were working fine, but we couldn't reach anyone. Like something was actively jamming our signals. "We need to move," I told the team. "This thing has been planning this." We packed up and started hiking toward the main trail, hoping to get back to civilization before whatever was out there decided to stop playing games. But every path we tried led us to dead ends or dangerous terrain. The thing was hurting us, just like it had done with Lisa's group weeks earlier. Around noon, we heard something moving parallel to us through the tree line. Something big, staying just out of sight, but making enough noise that we knew it was there. When we stopped, it stopped. When we changed direction, it changed direction. Then Carlos spotted it, about 100 yards ahead, standing in a clearing between 2 large spruce trees, was the biggest humanoid creature I've ever seen. It had to be 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with shoulders broader than any human. But what scared me most were its eyes, forward-facing like a predator, and unmistakably intelligent. It was holding a sharpened stick in one hand and what looked like a carefully chosen rock in the other. Not random weapons, tools it had prepared specifically for hunting. The creature looked directly at us for about 10 seconds, then melted back into the forest without making a sound. "Did everyone see that?" I whispered. They had. And now we knew we were being hunted by something that was physically superior to us in every way. Understood the terrain better than we did. And he's been planning this encounter for hours, or maybe days. The attack started that afternoon. First, boulders came rolling down from the mountainsides, not random rock slides, but precisely aimed stones that forced us to take cover and split up. While we were separated, the creature picked off our group one by one. Beth disappeared first. We heard her scream, then nothing. When we found her gear 30 minutes later, it was arranged in the same neat piles we'd seen at the missing hiker's campsite. Carlos went next. He was checking our rear position when something grabbed him and dragged him into the forest faster than any of us could react. Now it was just me and 2 volunteers, and we were completely out of our depth. This thing had been studying human behavior for years. It knew how we'd react under pressure, how we'd try to help each other, how we'd panic when separated. But it made one mistake. The creature cornered us in a box canyon, blocking the only obvious exit with its massive body. It thought we were trapped, that we'd either surrender or try to fight our way past it. What it didn't understand was that all 3 of us had serious rock climbing experience. While it guarded the canyon mouth, we free-climbed a 60-foot rock face that looked impossible from below. The creature realized what we were doing too late to stop us. From the top of the canyon, I could see down into its lair. A cave system filled with human remains and personal belongings going back decades. Clothing, equipment, even some vehicles that had been carefully dismantled and carried piece by piece up the mountain. This thing had been systematically hunting and collecting humans for at least 20 years. And based on what I saw, it was getting better at it over time. We made it back to civilization and reported everything to the Alaska State Troopers. They mounted a search operation with helicopters and dozens of officers, but found nothing, no evidence, no creature, no trace of our missing team members. Officially, Beth and Carlos died in a climbing accident. The 3 missing hikers were listed as lost to exposure. The case was closed within a month. I still work search and rescue, but I transferred to a different region. I've never been back to Chugach State Park, and I never will. Whatever's up there is still hunting, still learning, still collecting. If you're planning to hike those mountains, don't go alone. Don't trust voices calling for help after dark. And if you find your equipment carefully dismantled instead of randomly destroyed, get out immediately. Some things in the wilderness are just hungry, but what's in Chugach is something much worse. It's curious about us. And that curiosity has been feeding on human lives for longer than anyone wants to admit. My name is Danny Kozlov, and I've been a commercial fisherman working the waters around Southeast Alaska for 15 years. I'm third-generation Russian-American. In Fiktenmi, my grandfather came here in the 1940 seconds, and my father taught me every fishing ground from Ketchikan to Prince of Wales Island. I've weathered 100-mile-per-hour storms, pulled drowning men from freezing water, and worked 18-hour days in conditions that would break most people. I thought I'd seen everything the ocean could throw at me. But what I discovered in September 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about what lives beneath these waters. I run a 36-foot seiner called the Times Natasha Asterisk, named after my grandmother. She's got a 350-horsepower Caterpillar diesel, fish finder sonar, GPS navigation, and VHF radio that can reach the Coast Guard from anywhere in the Alexander Archipelago. I've been fishing these waters since I was 18, starting as crew on my uncle's boat before buying my own. The work is dangerous. Every year, we lose fishermen to accidents, storms, or equipment failures. But it's honest work, and it pays well when the salmon runs are good. September is prime time for silver salmon. The fish are running heavy, and every boat in the fleet is working overtime to fill their holds before the season closes. I usually work alone or with one crew member, depending on the size of the catch. The weather had been perfect. Calm seas, clear skies, and fish showing up on sonar in numbers I hadn't seen in years. That morning, I was heading out to my usual spot near Gravina Island, about 8 miles south of Ketchikan. I'd been fishing this area for over a decade. I knew every rock, every current, every place the salmon liked to school. The water was glassy calm, and my fish finder was showing good activity at 40 feet. I dropped my nets and settled in for what looked like it was going to be a profitable day. But something was wrong. Normally, when you're fishing productive water, you see marine mammals, seals, sea lions, sometimes whales. They follow the fish, looking for easy meals. That morning, the water was dead. No splashes, no dorsal fins, nothing. In 15 years of fishing, I'd never seen the ocean so empty of life. Around 10 in the morning, I started hauling in my nets. The catch was good, maybe 300 pounds of silver salmon, all prime fish. But as I was winching up the net, something bumped against the side of my boat. At first, I thought it might be a log or some debris. Then I heard a sound I'll never forget, a low, whistling moan, like air being forced through a damaged windpipe. I looked over the side, and that's when I saw it. A harbor seal had surfaced next to the Times Natasha Asterisk, but something was horribly wrong. The animal had no skin. Its entire hide had been removed with surgical precision, leaving exposed muscle and tissue that glistened red and pink in the morning sun. But the seal was still alive. It was still breathing, still moving, and when it looked up at me, its eyes were completely aware and filled with what I can only describe as agony. The cuts were too clean, too precise. This wasn't the work of a shark or killer whale. Those predators tear and rip. This looked like someone had used a scalpel, removing the skin in one perfect piece. The seal's flippers still moved, its mouth opened and closed, and it made that horrible whistling sound as it tried to breathe through exposed tissue. I grabbed my gaff hook, thinking maybe I could help somehow, but the moment I reached toward the water, the seal sank beneath the surface. I never saw it again. I called it in to the Coast Guard on Channel 16, reporting what I'd seen. The duty officer took my information, but I could tell from his tone that he thought I was either drunk or hallucinating. They logged the report and told me to continue monitoring the situation. Over the next 2 weeks, similar reports started coming in, from boats all over the archipelago. Captain Joe Martinez found a sea otter near Annette Island, completely skinless but still swimming. The Hendricks brothers discovered a small whale calf floating near Craig, its hide removed so precisely that the muscle underneath was undamaged. Every animal was found alive, but they all died within minutes of being spotted. The thing that bothered everyone was that the skins were never found. Whatever was doing this was taking the hides with them. Dr. Elena Santos, a marine biologist from the University of Alaska, came down to investigate. She examined photos and interviewed fishermen, and her conclusion was disturbing. These cuts require tools and anatomical knowledge that no animal possesses. She told us at a meeting in Ketchikan, "We're looking at surgical precision. Someone is doing this deliberately." But who and why? The answer came when my friend Mike Petrov disappeared. Mike was a good fisherman, maybe the best in the fleet. He'd been working these waters for 20 years, and he knew them better than anyone. On October 15th, the Coast Guard found his boat, the Times Bearing Dawn Asterisk, drifting empty near Prince of Wales Island. The engine was still running, all his gear was aboard, but Mike was gone. I was part of the search team that boarded his vessel. What we found in the fish hold made my blood run cold. Instead of salmon, Mike's hold was filled with animal skins, dozens of them, perfectly preserved and organized by species. Seal skins, sea otter pelts, even what looked like whale hide, all fresh and still bloody. But the most disturbing thing was Mike's logbook. The final entries described meetings with customers who paid gold coins for fresh specimens. The coins were like nothing I'd ever seen, heavy, unmarked except for strange symbols that looked almost like writing, but in no language I recognized. Mike's last entry was dated the day he disappeared. Agreed to provide the special order. They want human quality now. Meeting at the coordinates tonight. The payment will set me up for life. The coordinates led to a hidden cove on the backside of Annette Island, a place I'd fished near but never explored. According to Mike's notes, his customers only worked at night and arrived in boats that made no sound on the water. I should have reported what I found to the authorities. But Mike was my friend, and I needed to know what happened to him. 2 nights later, I took the Times Natasha Times to those coordinates. The cove was narrow and deep, surrounded by cliffs that blocked most of the moonlight. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The water glowed with a faint blue light, like phosphorescence, but stronger and more consistent. I cut my engine and drifted closer to shore. That's when I saw the caves. The cliffs were riddled with openings, and that blue light was coming from inside them. I could hear sounds echoing from the caves. Mechanical, humming, like surgical equipment, and underneath that, a soft keening that might have been animal cries. I anchored the boat and swam to shore with a waterproof flashlight. The nearest cave entrance was just above the high tide line, and the blue light was bright enough to see by once my eyes adjusted. The passage led deep into the cliff, and the sounds grew louder as I went deeper. What I found in that cave still haunts my dreams. It was a surgical facility unlike anything I'd ever imagined. The walls were lined with what looked like operating tables, each one occupied by a living marine mammal. Seals, sea otters, even small whales were restrained on these tables while tall, pale figures worked on them with instruments that gleamed in the blue light. The figures weren't human. They were roughly human-shaped but too tall, too thin, with skin like polished marble and no facial features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Their hands ended in long, delicate fingers that moved with impossible precision as they surgically removed hides from living animals. The animals were conscious throughout the procedure. Their eyes followed the movements of their captors, filled with terror and pain, but they couldn't cry out. Whatever the pale figures had done to them prevented any sound. As I watched in horror, one of the creatures finished its work on a harbor seal. It lifted the perfectly removed skin and carried it to a rack where dozens of other pelts hung drying. The skinless seal was then carried to what looked like a recovery area, where it joined other mutilated animals that continued to live despite their condition. That's when one of the creatures noticed me. It turned its featureless head in my direction, and suddenly I could hear a voice in my mind, not words, but concepts and images that felt like cold fingers touching my brain. Images flashed through my mind, the creatures moving through underwater cities, wearing the skins of surface animals, like costumes. They showed me warehouses filled with preserved hides, including what I realized with growing horror were human skins stretched on frames like leather, * missing persons. Replacement, integration, study, *. They explained that they'd been trading with desperate fishermen for decades, offering gold for fresh specimens. But now they were moving to the next phase of their plan, infiltrating coastal communities by wearing human skin like disguises. They showed me what had happened to Mike. He hadn't disappeared. He'd been skinned alive, just like the animals. His hide now hung in their collection, and one of the creatures had already used it to walk among humans in Ketchikan, studying our behavior and preparing for a larger invasion. The creature extended one of its impossibly long hands, and I saw more of those strange gold coins resting in its palm. They were offering me Mike's position, wealth beyond imagining, in exchange for providing them with human specimens. I pretended to consider their offer, while my mind raced for an escape plan. I nodded and reached out as if to take the coins, but instead of accepting them, I grabbed my flashlight and smashed it against the cave wall. The sudden darkness confused them for just a moment, but it was enough. I ran for the cave entrance, hearing that mechanical humming rise to an angry whine behind me. As I reached the water, I could hear them pursuing me, not running, but moving through the cave with fluid, inhuman grace. I dove into the cove and swam for my boat as fast as I could. The water around me began to glow brighter, and I realized the creatures were moving beneath me, flowing through the water like it was air. Their pale forms darted past me, and I felt cold fingers brush against my legs as they tried to grab me. I reached the Natasha Times and hauled myself aboard, starting the engine and throwing it into full throttle. As I raced out of the cove, I looked back and saw the creatures emerging from the water onto the shore, their forms shimmering in the blue light. But my relief was short-lived. When I reached open water and tried to radio the Coast Guard, my crew member Tommy answered instead of the usual duty officer. Tommy shouldn't have been on my boat. I'd been working alone that night. "Danny, where you been?" Tommy's voice came through the radio. But something was wrong with it. The words were too precise, too carefully pronounced, like someone reading from a script. I turned around and saw him standing in the wheelhouse doorway. It was Tommy's face, Tommy's build, even Tommy's clothes. But his movements were slightly off, too smooth, too deliberate, and his eyes didn't blink often enough. Tommy smiled at me, and I noticed that his skin didn't wrinkle naturally around his mouth. It was like watching someone wearing a mask that was almost perfect, but not quite. I realized the creatures had already replaced my crew. They'd been watching me, learning from me, preparing to take my place just like they'd taken Mike's. I jumped overboard and swam for shore, abandoning the Natasha Times and everything I'd worked for. Behind me, I could hear Tommy calling my name, but the voice was getting less human with each word. I made it to a fishing camp on Prince of Wales Island and used their radio to call for help. But when the Coast Guard arrived, they found my boat empty and adrift. There was no sign of any crew member, fake or otherwise. My logbook was missing, and there was no evidence of what I'd seen in that cave. The official report listed me as suffering from exhaustion and possible hypothermia-induced hallucinations. I was given a psychological evaluation and cleared for duty, but my fishing license was suspended pending a full investigation. That was 2 months ago. I haven't been back on the water since. The skinless animals have stopped appearing. At least, no one's reporting them anymore. But I've been watching the people of Ketchikan, and I've noticed things. Subtle things. People who move a little too precisely, who speak a little too carefully, whose skin doesn't wrinkle quite right when they smile. I think the creature's plan is working. They're replacing us, one by one, using the skins of people like Mike Petrov. And the worst part is, no one believes me. If you're a fisherman working these waters, be careful who you trust. If someone offers you gold coins for unusual catches, don't take them. And if you see animals without their skin, still alive and swimming, get as far away as you can. The skin traders are still out there, and they're not finished with their harvest. My name is Linda Aknavigak, and I've been a social worker for 8 years, specializing in trauma counseling for children in Arctic communities. I'm a Nupiat myself, born and raised in Utqiagvik, what most people still call Barrow, so I understand the unique challenges our kids face up here. The isolation, the long dark winters, the cultural pressures. I've handled cases involving substance abuse, domestic violence, and even child endangerment in temperatures that can kill you in minutes. But what happened in November 2024 made me question everything I thought I knew about protecting children. Some things that hunt kids don't care about locked doors or safety protocols. I work out of the North Slope Borough Building, a practical concrete structure that houses most of our social services. My office is on the second floor, overlooking the frozen Chukchi Sea. The building runs on diesel generators, and the heating system sounds like a jet engine, but it keeps us warm when it's 40 below outside. My caseload usually runs about 30 kids, ranging from behavioral issues to family crisis intervention. I carry a satellite phone for emergencies, since cell service is spotty, and I drive a modified Toyota 4Runner with winter survival gear. The job isn't easy. Working with traumatized children requires patience, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to spot signs that others miss. I've completed specialized training in Arctic psychology and traditional healing practices. My grandmother was a healer, and she taught me that some problems need more than just Western medicine. The elders trust me because I respect the old ways while using modern tools. That combination saved my life. November in Barrow means permanent darkness. The sun disappeared on November 18th and wouldn't return until late January. By the third week of November, I was handling my usual winter spike in cases. Seasonal depression hits hard when you don't see daylight for 2 months. But this year was different. I started getting calls about children exhibiting identical behavioral problems across the community. The first case was Emma Tutu, a 7-year-old who lived with her grandparents near the cemetery. Her grandmother, Sarah, called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice shaking. "Linda, you need to come see Emma. She's singing things that aren't right." I drove out to their house, a small prefab structure with extra insulation and storm windows. The wind was howling at 30 miles per hour, driving snow horizontally across the tundra. Inside, the house felt warm but tense. Sarah met me at the door, her weathered face creased with worry. "She started 3 days ago," Sarah explained as we sat at her kitchen table. "Found some old bones out by the lagoon where the permafrost is melting. Brought them home before I could stop her." That night, she started singing. "What kind of singing?" I asked, pulling out my case notebook. "Come listen." We walked to Emma's room. Through the thin walls, I could hear it. A melody unlike anything I'd heard before. It wasn't English or Inupiaq. The tune seemed to burrow into my ears, creating a strange pressure in my head. Emma was sitting on her bed, eyes closed, singing in a low, hypnotic voice. The moment I heard it clearly, pain shot through my skull. Not a normal headache, something deeper, like the sound was vibrating inside my brain. In my peripheral vision, I started seeing things. Dark shapes moving at the edges of my sight, tall and thin, but when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. "Emma," I said gently, "can you stop singing for a minute?" Her eyes snapped open. For a second, I didn't recognize the child I knew. Her pupils were dilated, and she looked at me with an expression of hunger that made my skin crawl. "The bones taught me," she said in a voice too mature for her age. "I have to sing to feed the listeners. They get angry when I stop." "What listeners, Emma?" She pointed to the empty corner of her room. "The tall ones. They dance when I sing. They promise to show me the bone city underneath the ice if I keep singing." I spent an hour trying to calm Emma down, but every time she stopped singing, she became agitated and aggressive. She actually tried to bite her grandmother when Sarah attempted to take the bones away. I'd never seen behavior like this in 8 years of social work. Over the next week, I received 6 more calls about children exhibiting identical symptoms. All of them had been exposed to Emma's singing, at school, at the community center, or while playing outside. The melody spread like a contagion. Kids who heard it became obsessed with learning it, humming it constantly, then progressing to full singing sessions that could last for hours. Each affected child described the same vision: tall, skeletal figures that appeared when they sang. The children called them the listeners and claimed they lived in an underground city made of bones. What terrified me was the consistency of these descriptions. 7 different children, ages 5 to 12, all describing identical entities. My professional training told me this was mass hysteria or some kind of psychological contagion. Children are susceptible to suggestion, especially in isolated communities during stressful periods. But the physical symptoms couldn't be explained away. Every adult who listened to the singing for more than a few minutes developed severe headaches and visual hallucinations. I documented everything carefully, following proper case protocols. I contacted Child Protective Services in Anchorage, but they couldn't send anyone for at least a week due to weather. I was on my own. By the second week, I had 23 affected children on my caseload. The singing was becoming more complex. The kids were forming groups, creating harmonies that made the psychological effects even stronger. Parents were calling in panic, reporting that their children sang in their sleep and became violent when awakened. I decided to investigate the site where Emma had found the original bones. The location was about 2 miles east of town, near an area where recent warming had melted sections of permafrost that had been frozen for centuries. I drove out on a Wednesday morning when the wind had died down. The excavation site was obviously not natural. Ancient human remains were exposed in deliberate patterns, circular arrangements with the bones positioned at specific angles. I'm not an archaeologist, but even I could see that someone had arranged these remains intentionally. The bones showed signs of modification, small holes drilled into femurs and ribs, markings carved into skulls. I took photos with my phone and collected a small sample for analysis. The bones felt oddly warm despite the sub-zero temperature, and touching them made my teeth ache. That night, I contacted Dr. James Tikivik, an elder and traditional healer who had worked with my grandmother. If anyone would know about the historical significance of this site, it would be him. Those bones belong to the Kakortok, he told me over the phone, his voice heavy with concern. A cannibalistic cult that our ancestors drove out 800 years ago. They practiced bone magic, believed that consuming human bone marrow would give them supernatural abilities. What happened to them? Our people trapped their spirits in their own bones as punishment, buried them in the deep permafrost where they couldn't hurt anyone. But if the ice is melting, the temperature in my office seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dr. Tikivik, the children are singing songs they claim the bones taught them. The Kakortok feed by drawing calcium from living bones. The singing is how they call children to them. Linda, you need to stop this before they fully manifest. Fully manifest. The spirits have been feeding through the children's singing. Soon they'll be strong enough to take physical form. When that happens, they'll start the harvest. The next day, I called an emergency meeting at the community center. 15 families with affected children attended. The moment we gathered the kids in one room, they began singing together. The harmonized melody was incredibly powerful. Adults were collapsing within minutes, overwhelmed by hallucinations and pain. That's when I saw them. The listeners materialized around the singing children like smoke becoming solid. They were humanoid but wrong in every way, elongated skeletons with visible rib cages, skulls stretched vertically, and arms that hung down to their knees. They moved by vibrating their bones, creating the haunting melodies that the children had been learning. The creatures danced around the kids in complex patterns, their bone-rattling movements perfectly synchronized with the singing. And I realized with horror that the children were getting thinner. Their cheeks were more sunken. Their posture was changing as their spines weakened. "Stop!" I screamed, but the children couldn't hear me over their own singing. One of the entities turned toward me. Its skull face had empty sockets where eyes should be, but I felt its attention like ice water in my veins. When it opened its mouth, bone dust poured out instead of breath. "Join us," it said in a voice like breaking pottery. "Bring us more singers, and we will share the eternal dance with you." I ran. That night, I worked with Dr. Tikivik and 2 other traditional healers to prepare a countersong, an ancient Inupiaq melody that our ancestors had used to repel the Kakortok. We practiced for hours until we could perform it properly. The next morning, we returned to the community center. The affected children were still there, still singing, but they looked worse. Several had lost teeth, others were developing visible bone deformities. The skeletal entities were more solid now, more real. We began our countersong. The effect was immediate. The bone dancers writhed and shrieked, their forms becoming less stable. The children's harmonies faltered as our melody disrupted their connection to the spirits. But the entities weren't giving up easily. The largest skeleton lunged toward me, its bone claws reaching for my throat. I kept singing, even as it raked across my shoulder, tearing through my jacket. The other healers maintained the rhythm while I stumbled backward. The battle lasted 20 minutes, our voices against theirs, traditional protection songs against supernatural predation. Finally, the entities began to fade, retreating into the shadows as our counter-melody overwhelmed their bone music. The children collapsed in exhaustion, but they were breathing normally for the first time in weeks. We established a quarantine protocol for the affected kids and began intensive treatment using traditional healing songs combined with medical monitoring. It took 6 weeks, but we managed to reverse most of the bone deterioration. 3 children required long-term physical therapy, but they all survived. I submitted my official report to the state, documenting everything as a case of mass psychological episode with unknown environmental factors. The bone site was officially sealed and marked as contaminated. Dr. Tukivik arranged for traditional blessing ceremonies to reinforce the spiritual barriers. But I know the truth. Climate change is melting permafrost across the Arctic, exposing things that were buried for good reasons. The Kakratok are still out there, waiting for more children to find their bones, waiting for more singers to feed their hunger. I still work as a social worker, but now I carry traditional protection items along with my case files. I've trained other workers to recognize the signs of supernatural predation, and every time I get a call about children exhibiting unusual behavior near melting permafrost sites, my blood runs cold. The bone singers are patient. They've waited 800 years. They can wait longer. But so can we.